In the headlines, a clear disparity between South Korea's rival political parties over security policies, especially over the government's stance on anti-Pyongyang leaflets floated across the inter-Korean border. German lawmaker Hartmut Koschyk, a longtime advocate for Korean unification, sits down for an exclusive with ARIRANG News and says North Korea actually wants to talk to South Korea. And the United Nations says do away with fossil fuels altogether by the year 2100 or face severe, widespread, and irreversible effects of climate change. Hello and welcome, everyone. Hope your week is off to a great start. I'm Kang Chery in Seoul. Over in the National Assembly here in Korea, there was clear disparity between the main rival parties over the South Korean government's foreign and security policies. For one, lawmakers were particularly divided on Seoul's stance on the anti-North Korea leaflet launches. Choi Yoo-sun has more.
At Monday's interpellation session, the opposition party urged Seoul to intervene and stop South Korean civic groups from launching flyers that criticize the North Korean leadership across the border. The anti-North Korea leaflets have become a major obstacle in improving inter-Korean relations, with Pyongyang accusing Seoul of scheming against the regime, leading to their failed high-level talks late last month.
Severing inter-Korean dialogue because of the leaflets is being very narrow-minded. It's a digression from long-awaited conciliatory mood that has been established after a long impasse.
Opposition lawmakers also raised concerns about North Korean threats against the safety of South Koreans living near the border.
We have no legal basis to control the leaflet launches, but we are taking appropriate measures when problems arise related to public safety or from internal conflict.
The Prime Minister, as well as the ruling party, criticized Pyongyang for citing the leaflets as the reason that led to failed talks. As for delaying the deadline for Seoul to regain wartime operational control of its troops from Washington, the ruling side said the decision was necessary for South Korea to better counter against North Korean nuclear threats.
The government should create a task force of experts to come up with a detailed roadmap to secure a defense budget needed for the command control transfer.
While the opposition side demanded President Park Geun-hye apologize for failing to fulfill her campaign pledge, the Prime Minister said it was only right for Seoul to postpone the handover until a condition is achieved where Pyongyang drops all its nuclear ambitions. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
And over in North Korea, where pressure is to denuclearize is mounting, U.S. Secretary of State Kang Chery says China is putting stronger pressure on North Korea than it was a year ago, citing trade restrictions. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
U.S. Secretary of State Kang Chery has praised China for doing more to pressure North Korea. Speaking with Bloomberg News, Chery said the Chinese were taking measures beyond the ones they were a year ago. He cited examples such as China reducing the amount of jet fuel being exported to the north and additional limitations being placed on trade. Chery also noted that Chinese President Xi Jinping has held at least 5 meetings with South Korean President Park Geun-hye, but none with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Seoul and Washington have long called on China, North Korea's only major ally, to play a greater role in getting Pyongyang to demonstrate a willingness to give up its nuclear weapons. But Beijing had been accommodating toward the North in fear of hurting Chinese national interests. Chery added that there's still an uncertainty as to where the North Korean leader wants to take his country and that this view is shared by China. The top U.S. diplomat also said Washington is as keen as Beijing to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on the North's denuclearization, but stressed the U.S. needs assurances that Pyongyang is prepared to discuss scrapping its nuclear weapons. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And while there are calls to Pyongyang to return to the negotiating table, German lawmaker Hartmut Koschyk, a longtime advocate for Korean unification, says North Korea actually wants to talk to South Korea. Mr. Koschyk was in Pyongyang for 6 days recently and held talks with the chairman of the Supreme People's Assembly as well as North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister. Our Hwang Seok-gi sat down with Mr. Koschyk for an exclusive interview.
When you talked to North Korean officials during your stay there, what did they say about inter-Korean relations?
Many of the North Korean officials I spoke with were very clear. North Korea hopes to improve relations with South Korea. The attendance of 3 high-level officials at the closing ceremony of the Asian Games shows this very well. They said rebuilding trust is the most important step for improving South-North relations. As the basis for trust building, they referred to former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung's visit to North Korea in 2000 and the June 15th joint statement that followed.
There are speculations about the regime instability in North Korea. What was your impression?
Of course, Kim Jong-un's power cannot be compared to that of his father, Kim Jong-il, in his prime, but he has enough leverage to control the current situation. The power is not held solely by him, though. It is divided among other agents, such as the party, the military, or the economic bodies. But Kim is able to maintain a balance among them. However, I do see a need for a policy to promote overall stability.
So before your visit to Pyongyang, you also visited China and you met with officials there. Did you have any talks about North Korea with them?
There are tensions between North Korea and China. China wants North Korea to return to the 6-party framework and to pursue more reform measures on its own. But at the same time, its biggest interest is securing stability in North Korea and on the Korean peninsula. Therefore, Beijing is not opposed to Pyongyang's relations with Europe and Berlin. And China believes its friendship with South Korea is helpful in maintaining stability on the Korean peninsula and Northeast Asia.
You've been a long-time advocate of the unification of the 2 Koreas. In your view, what's the biggest hurdle to the Korean unification, and how do we make that leap?
The challenge can be largely divided into 2. First is solving the dire humanitarian situation in North Korea. The second, and the most important and difficult task, is North Korea's nuclear program. The neighboring countries must also be considered. The fundamental step is resolving tensions between the 2 Koreas, but at the same time, seeking understanding from the United States, China, and Japan remains a challenge.
And where does Germany come in?
Germany will not be a mediator. It will also not be a master that can offer a great deal of knowledge. But what we can do is to give little bits of advice based on our own experience with unification.
Thank you, Mr. Koschyk, for your time today.
It was a pleasure for me.
Korea's lawmakers are also reviewing next year's budget plan, but the rival parties are already locking horns on whether the plan is sufficient to boost Korea's ailing economy. Ji Myung-gil reports.
Discussions on next year's budget have begun at the National Assembly, with the ruling and opposition parties promising to pass it by the legal deadline of December 2nd. The 2015 budget calls for a 5.7% on-year increase in government spending to some $350 billion.
We must meet the legal deadline, as it is our last best opportunity to boost Korea's economy.
The ruling Saenuri Party says the budget promoted by the government as necessary for boosting the economy must be kept intact. But the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has been stepping up its attacks on the government's recent expansionary fiscal and monetary policies, promoting its own plan instead.
We have 5 principles set for next year's budget: endorsing financial health for the central and local governments, restoring corporate taxes for conglomerates, increasing household income, and securing a bigger budget for safety-related purposes.
Compounding concerns about the increased budget plans, the government has been facing a shortfall of tax revenue since 2012. According to the Finance Ministry, the government collected $126 billion in national tax revenue from January to August, which is down to $178 million from the same period last year. And while both parties are speaking in optimistic terms about the budget being passed by December 2nd, Korea's parliament is notorious for its year-end budget wars. No budget bill has been passed by the legal deadline since 2002. However, that won't be the case this year, as parliamentary law revisions made last year mean the draft proposal will be automatically referred to the regular session on December 1st, even if the rival parties don't reach an agreement on the bill. Kim Young-gyun, ARIRANG News.
Korea's biggest conglomerate, Samsung, is trying to restructure in the face of their ailing chairman, Lee Gun-hee. One of Samsung Group's oldest founding companies is set to go public by the end of this year, setting the stage for more Samsung affiliates to quickly follow suit. This also paves the way for Samsung Electronics to establish a holdings company early next year. Song Ji-sun has the details.
Seoul Industries, the mother company of Samsung Group that was founded 6 decades ago, is going public. Seoul filed for an initial public offering of around $50 per share to the Financial Supervisory Service on Friday, with plans to go public on December 18th, earlier than the market forecast of the first quarter of next year. Samsung's IT services subsidiary, Samsung SDS, also filed for an IPO next Friday, with a starting stock price of $185 per share. Market analysts view this as a means of speeding up the group's restructuring to found a Samsung Holdings company that could eventually shore up control for the conglomerate's family members. One of the most plausible scenarios is that Samsung Electronics splits in two in the first quarter of next year, with one becoming a holdings company and merging with Seoul Industries. Now, why go through with this process? Because this way, the heir apparent to the Samsung throne, Lee Jae-yong, who owns a quarter of Seoul Industries' share as its biggest shareholder, can minimize inheritance taxes with his share of Seoul stocks dropping to 8%. At the same time, he increases his influence in Samsung Electronics as his current share of 0.6% jumps to that same level. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
South Korea and China have agreed to conduct joint surveillance in the West Sea to crack down on illegal fishing by Chinese nationals in Korean waters. Korea's Fisheries Ministry said Monday that the two countries will begin patrols before the end of this year. Talks on the issue were delayed, actually, after a Chinese fishing boat captain was killed last month in a clash with Korean Coast Guard. It's the latest in a series of violent incidents between the two sides in recent years. In 2011, a Korean Coast Guard official was stabbed to death during a raid. Over 1,800 Chinese boats have been seized for illegal activities within Korea's exclusive economic zone in the last 5 years. If you can travel to anywhere in the world, where would you go? For many Koreans, the top answer was Europe. In a survey conducted by the travel site Expedia on 1,000 working men and women in their 20s through 40s, more than 34% picked Europe as their top destination for traveling without a package deal. Coming in second place with 30% of the votes was Southeast Asia, including countries like Thailand and Singapore. Places closer to home came in third, with 27% of the voters opting for Taiwan, Japan, or China. Korea's favorite and #1 messaging application, Kakao Talk, is stretching its boundaries and trying to go global, backed by new services and its recent merger with the country's #2 internet portal operator, Daum Communications. But will it be enough to win over consumers outside of Korea? Shin Se-min has this week's industry insight.
9 out of 10 smartphone users in Korea use KakaoTalk, the country's #1 mobile messaging service. In Korea, you don't say I'll text you, you say I'll KakaoTalk you. But it's not stopping there. The services KakaoTalk offers are expansive and growing all the time. Users can send small amounts of money, go shopping, and even send gifts and vouchers. KakaoTalk is also able to connect small businesses with their customers. Soon, it aims to roll out features that allow users to call a taxi and control their home appliances, and even help drivers find an empty parking spot.
We already have a solid platform here at Kakao, but we never stop innovating, and extra features are in the works all the time. By making use of Daum's established portal, we're looking to provide more state-of-the-art services that will eventually be used in our daily lives.
Those state-of-the-art services will come with the pairing of Kakao and the nation's second-largest internet portal, Daum Corporation, this year, and from going public last month. Daum Kakao currently has a market capitalization of over $7 billion, making it one of the country's largest IT firms. Under its new slogan, Connect Everything, Daum Kakao is hoping to lead the march to have everything connected to the internet. A personalized location-based service is under development, drawing on the strength of each arm of the business. By utilizing Daum's pre-existing and highly detailed map service, KakaoTalk hopes to launch a feature that notifies users when they're near a restaurant chain or clothing store they like. However, challenges lie ahead, namely convincing international consumers to make the jump to KakaoTalk.
Daum Kakao missed the boat for entering the global market. Countries already have their preferred messaging services. In China, they like WeChat. Line is in Japan, and WhatsApp has a grip on the US. It's going to be really hard for Daum Kakao to squeeze in between.
The company also has problems at home due to a privacy scandal. A significant number of users abandoned KakaoTalk for foreign messaging applications like Germany's Telegram, following the revelation that the Korean company had given prosecutors access to thousands of users' private conversations. But Kakao's strength, analysts point out, is in its user-friendly services. Whether that ultimately translates into success on the global stage remains to be seen. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
A UN panel has issued a stark warning on global climate change, that is, calling on countries to slash greenhouse gas emissions to zero by the end of this century. And to tell us more, Paul is joining us. Paul, this is one of the most comprehensive reports released on this issue, but what are the consequences if the world doesn't heed to this warning?
Well, the implications could be catastrophic, calling it one of the greatest threats to food security. The newly released UN report said climate change, if left unchecked, will have irreversible impacts on the planet. Speaking in Copenhagen on Sunday, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warned that world leaders must act now, as time is not on our side. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The United Nations climate body is warning that time is not on our side to stop soaring temperatures, making the world unlivable. Launching the latest study from the Environmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN said the world faces severe, widespread, and irreversible effects if moves are not made to completely stop using fossil fuels by 2100. It says the use of low-carbon sources needs to rise from 30% of electricity generation now to more than 80% by the middle of the century to limit rising temperatures.
The window of action is really closing very rapidly. If you look at the total carbon budget to ensure that temperature increase by the end of this century will not exceed 2 degrees Celsius, we've already used up a substantial share of this.
Scientists say a rise of 2 degrees Celsius is the level at which the dangerous impacts of climate change will be felt. But the IPCC says the world is at risk of temperatures soaring by 4.8 degrees or even higher by 2100 if things continue as they are.
So this clearly shows that we have a very limited window of opportunity, and I think the global community must look at these numbers and show the resolve by which we can bring about change.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon also stressed the need for action before it's too late.
Inaction of climate action will cost much, much more. This climate action and economic growth are two sides of just one coin.
The IPCC study will be the main handbook for 200 nations when they meet for a global summit on climate change in Paris late next year. China, the United States, the EU, and India are the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitters. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And turning to Pakistan, Paul, the country's only border crossing with India has been attacked by an apparent suicide bomber, leaving over 50 people dead and more than 100 injured. This has been condemned as a terrorist attack by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What are local authorities there saying?
Well, Pakistani police say they are still investigating Sunday's deadly attack as security remained on high alert along the border area in the early morning hours on Monday. The explosion took place at a car park near the Pakistani city of Lahore, following a daily flag-lowering ceremony that draws hundreds of spectators from both sides of the border. Provincial police reportedly said at least 55 people were killed, with a number of wounded overwhelming nearby hospitals.
We have about 60 injured people. We are transferring them to different hospitals. We are transporting the dead bodies to the morgue. We have to do three things. We have to secure the crime scene, we have to identify the dead bodies, and hand them over to their relatives. There are children and women among the injured.
The Pakistani Taliban has claimed responsibility for the blast, saying it was in retaliation to counter terrorism operations by the government near the country's border with Afghanistan. However, several other militant factions have also reportedly laid claim to the violence.
And the double murder of two women has gripped Hong Kong as police charged a British banker in connection to this case. These killings, Paul, have dominated the headlines there. How did authorities find the bodies to begin with?
Well, the 29-year-old British banker you mentioned was actually the one who called the police to his apartment in the upscale Wan Chai district on Saturday. Investigators then found one of the women with stab wounds, while the other was discovered inside a suitcase. Rogue George Canton Judding was arrested and briefly appeared in court on Monday. He merely said he understood the charges and declined to enter a plea. According to court documents, Judding had recently worked at Bank of America Merrill Lynch as a securities trader. His co-workers reportedly said he had been absent for more than a week around the time of the alleged murders. Local media have described the two victims as sex workers, adding that one was Indonesian. Though a bustling city of 7 million, the incident has come as a shock, as Hong Kong is known for its low crime rates, with only 14 cases of homicide reported in the first half of this year.
And finally, Paul, American daredevil Nik Wallenda has cheated death once again, this time crossing a tightrope between 3 skyscrapers in Chicago without a safety net or harness. This is unimaginable. What drove him to attempt the stunt?
Well, and asked that same question before he crossed the Chicago skyline, Wallenda said he needed to continue pushing himself to be better at his job and also inspire others. The 35-year-old broke 2 world records on Sunday by completing the walk across a steel wire over 50 stories above the Chicago River. He completed the first walk in just under 7 minutes, while the second blindfolded in just under 1 minute, all done in the face of winds of up to 40 kilometers per hour.
You know what? I think you probably saw me shaking like a leaf. That wire was shaking underneath me, and, I just wanted to make it to the other side. I wasn't going to think twice. I was getting on the wire. I'm going.
The Discovery Channel televised the entire spectacle to millions of viewers in more than 220 countries. Chicago police estimated some 50,000 people turned out to watch the death-defying stunt by Wallenda, who is a 7th-generation high-wire circus performer. Charity?
Oh my, just looking at the footage gave me kind of funny feelings inside. Anyways, thank you so much, Paul, for those stories, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Hello, I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the weather updates. It looks like winter is here because the first snow of the season fell on Mount Halla over in Mount Jeju. Also, earlier today, cold wave advisories were issued for some regions, but that has now been lifted. Besides, at the moment, we are under fairly clear skies due to a high-pressure system from China. Besides that, a dry weather watch continues to be in effect for parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeonggi-do provinces, as well as Seoul. For those of you heading out, make sure to dress warmly as temperatures will remain below the seasonal average range through tomorrow morning. Looking ahead, showers are in store for parts of the eastern coast on Thursday and Friday. Here are the readings for tomorrow. Seoul starts off the day at 5 degrees before hitting 18 in the afternoon. Cities down south also reach 18. On to other regions. Daejeon and Dokdo reach 15, Jeju peaks at 16. That'll do it for this hour. I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Bo-kyung, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.